What is your biggest concern as it relates to the map, but also technology and the future that we're heading towards? What's your biggest concern?
I don't know that that's a really interesting question, and I know I should have like a pat answer right off the top of my head. Um, I tend to look at the next big global conflict. So I'm not so much. Again, don't get me wrong. These are bad, right? These potential flare-ups, these problems, this conflict here in the Middle East. These are all bad. People are suffering. But I think about the next actual global conflict, and when that occurs, right, just like another pandemic's going to happen, right? I mean, it's not like we're not going to get another pandemic. When the next big global conflict occurs, I think what we're going to find is that the pain is brought to the homeland a lot quicker, right? So what I mean by that is, say you're in the U.S. Well, we know that nations that don't necessarily have U.S. interests at heart, China, let's focus on China because they are, close to the top of the heap and they're motivated to get to the top. Not saying it's going to be a shooting match, but the point being is every day the critical infrastructure, critical systems in the U.S. are being tested and poked and prodded and looked at and mapped out. And there's a reason why that happens, right? So they're developing a playbook that says in the event that it should happen and we have a global conflict, we are going to shut down everything we can shut down in the U.S. Suddenly, all power goes off. Your water treatment facilities aren't working. You can't move fuel around. You can't get fuel. Pharmaceuticals aren't being delivered. No food is being delivered. Can't get cash out, whether you want cash or not at that point. The idea being is we're going to bring the pain to the homeland, right, immediately. That's what you want to do. Will there be a kinetic element? Will you actually have a shooting match with troops on ground? Yeah, I'm not sure that ever goes away. But the next global conflict is going to be fought in a way that we have a hard time understanding. And then it'll be up in space as well. The Chinese have spent a great deal of effort on directed energy weapons. And one of the points of that is essentially to knock out satellite systems, right? You think about it, take away satellite structures, whether it's Starlink or any of the satellite systems up there. You shut down GPS, right? People can't move. You shut down the internet. My God, people will lose their minds, right? Can't do TikTok. And so it's, not to make light of it because we're talking about a different type of warfare. And so that's kind of the thing that I worry about. If you said, what do people really worry about? Well, yeah, the top concerns are always, China and Russia and Iran, but it's the infrastructure and it's a way that it's going to be brought to the homeland that's going to create, I think, a level of pain that most people aren't going to be willing to put up with for very long.
When you say they're going to bring pain to the homeland, were you saying the US were going to shut down their infrastructure?
No, I'm saying that whoever, I'm just, as a U, it could be any, it could be the EU in a conflict. It could be the US and NATO in a conflict with another. But the point being is that, they don't map out infrastructure for no reason at all.
Who's mapping the infrastructure?
Well, Russia, China,
Okay, they're mapping
Iran,
our infrastructure.
Our infrastructure. We're doing the same thing.
Yeah, sure.
And people always say that, say, well, you're doing the same thing. Well, you better hope that whether it's the UK or whether it's Australia or whether it's the US, that you hope that we're engaged in the same activities because that's where this is going to end up going. Having said that, if someone had said we're going to be engaged in a massive land war, World War I style with trenches and very little ground gain and lots of bombardment over it, people would have said, nah, it's never going to happen again.
But that's happening in Ukraine right now.
And it's happening in Ukraine. You can go, the Imperial War Museum in London, which is a wonderful museum. They've got a World War I exhibit. And you go through the World War I exhibit and you look at it and you realize the same thing is taking place. I mean, you look at the aerial photographs of the front line and you see the trench lines here in Ukraine. It's stunning. And we're just making the same mistakes over again.
It's funny how history has a strange way of repeating itself.
Yeah, because we like to think that we learn.
But we're dealing with the same old humans with the same old emotions and egos and ideologies and stuff over and over again. So it's...
because humans haven't changed. You're right. You're absolutely, that's right.
How are you preparing on a personal level? If you're seeing that some of these...
A lot of guns and ammo.
Really?
No, I'm kidding. Well, no, I'm not kidding. But that's not how I'm preparing. I just like to, load up.
Because you're saying you don't believe Americans and, Westerners really understand how the next big global conflict will look.
Yeah.
So is there a way they can prepare for such a conflict?
Well, on one level, people need to read as much as they can and pay attention, right? I mean, get as many different sources of information. Don't just read one outlet that you happen to agree with. But try to be as informed as possible, which I think sometimes is difficult to do because we're all busy, right? We're all putting food on the table and trying to take care of families and whatever. But and so I think there's an element of folks just trying to be informed, and then that would be, look, I mean, the pandemic that occurred, the COVID-19 thing. If people were really, really watching what was going on, October 2019, right? There's this weird situation going on in China. A couple of cities were quarantined, and that started to bubble up, and people were paying attention to it. I was getting notifications about, what the hell's going on in China, well before there was any declaration of a problem, right? And so, and the Wuhan lab was mentioned repeatedly. So I think just being informed is one of the best things that people can do. And then, I'm not a prepper, but it's always good just to, be prepared for a natural crisis, right? Power goes out because there's a blackout. Fine. There's a, whatever the reason may be. Just be a little aware of and have a plan of some sort that says, if there is a natural disaster, not saying a shooting match, then what do I do? What's my commo plan? I got kids at school. How do I reach them?
We're so unprepared because in our lifetimes, we've never had a war.
Right.
So I grew up, I'm 32 years old now. I assume wars happen in other places. Mm-hmm. They don't happen in the UK or in LA or New York. They happen over there. So I'm comfortable and I'm complacent to some degree. Mm-hmm. And I could never imagine even an adversarial plane flying over my city.
Yeah, there's a level of we've all gotten, I don't want to say soft necessarily, but look, every generation wants it to be easier, right? My parents were older when they had me. They were born in 1919 and 1920, right? And they went through the the tough times, economic times. They went through a couple of wars. They wanted it better for their kids, right? Now, their parents, my grandparents, wanted it better for them, right? And so on and so forth. That's human nature. You want to be doing the best for your kids. You want it to be better for that generation. I think eventually you reach diminishing returns, right? And I do worry that that's kind of where we're at. I look at my own kids, and look, nobody's out there, in here or over here or wherever. There's certainly places in the world where that's not true. But these areas here that we're talking about, we're not out worrying about whether we can collect enough food and clean water necessarily. We're worried about is my Wi-Fi signal strong enough?
But it's interesting. When you were talking about Israel earlier, you said how Israel had got a bit comfortable, so they started infighting.
Right.
And what you're seeing over in the United States and other parts of Europe is infighting. It's like we've got nothing better to do, so we're arguing over identity politics, and things are getting more woke and it's more divided because, I don't know, it's like we have nothing better to do.
Right. And also that's being fueled. Look, you never want to underestimate the impact of the disinformation campaigns run by, again, I keep going, I sound like I'm just constantly throwing out the same bogeyman, but look, that's the way the world is. China, Russia in particular, Iran has proven itself to be very adept at this, at disinformation campaigns that prey on, whether it's in the EU or whether it's in the US or elsewhere, that prey on what they view as vulnerabilities. So it goes back to what we were talking about before about recruiting an asset, right? Or identifying weaknesses and leverage. Well, they look at the U.S. and they go, you know what? If we kind of just keep poking at that racist issue, we keep poking it at woke issues, right? That's very divisive, and it does, right? It works. So the next thing you know, they're putting together a bot. They're throwing out some misinformation or disinformation on X. Someone looks at that and goes, yeah, that's right. And then they just forward it on to their friends and their family, and it just keeps building. So those campaigns have a real significant impact on the West, because we're not inclined, for whatever reason, we're not curious enough, or we don't have enough time or whatever, to look at a piece of information and go, is this even credible?
What do you say to people that think that's just completely impossible. It's a conspiracy theory. There's no way China and Russia are involved in misinformation. There's no way they're trying to tear us apart.
Yeah, you know what? All they need to do is a little fact-based research. Spend a little time. They don't have to look at one side or another. Look across the board at a variety of think tanks, research institutes that focus on this sort of thing. And no, there is no doubt there is a concerted effort to influence, whether it's an election, and they're not trying necessarily to get anybody to win. They're just trying to undermine the concept of democracy. They want to create some chaos. That's from their perspective, that's a win. So,
do you not think Russia wanted Trump to win?
That's a good question. I don't know. If they did, I think they've made a mistake or they've calculated wrong here, because I know there's sort of a trope out there that says, well, he's Putin's puppet. Well, we also have to remember that was a very large disinformation campaign or misinformation campaign. And I don't want to make it sound more nefarious, but people swallowed that hook, line, and sinker and then ran with it, right? Over this idea that, oh my God, look at the dossier. So I think, there's sort of this narrative that says, okay, well, yeah, Putin definitely wanted Trump to win because Trump's going to completely get out of Ukraine. I don't think that's going to happen. And there's already been reporting that he had a call with Putin already. Now the Kremlin's saying, oh, that call never happened. But according to Western reporting, he had a call and he said, you are not to intensify this war. And then basically setting down a marker. Now, again, we won't know until he gets out there and he starts putting more people in place. I'm very curious to see who he puts in at the Pentagon and at the Defense Department. But
because if I was Putin, I know Trump has ran his whole campaign saying he's going to end this war. And if I'm Putin, I go, that means that I don't have to throw more men at the front line. I can get my economy back. Putin also wants to end this war. But if Trump doesn't end that war in the next 4 years, the Democrats are going to get in, because they're going to say, you said you were going to end the war. We're still out there fighting. You said you're going to end this. So Trump,
but think about it. If he does end the war, then they're going to say, well, yeah, that's because, you gave away. You and Putin like each other. And you gave away, some Ukrainian territory. Well, the reality is, look, Putin, he annexed Crimea during Obama's administration. He invaded during Biden's administration. He knew what he had. He knew what the response was going to be. Now, look, people say, well, Biden, to his credit, he kind of rallied and he pushed for more support. And yes, that's absolutely true. But Putin engaged in this during his time, right? Because I think he knew, or he felt he knew, maybe that's more important, he felt he knew what he was going to get. Now, he wasn't anticipating that NATO response was going to be as hardline, and that's a good thing. I'm glad that Biden has done that. Biden has also withheld authorization to use long-range munitions to target Russian military sites that are being used to target Ukraine, right? Now, you could argue that until Putin feels some pain or Ukraine is in a better offensive position of some sort, that you can't get people to the negotiating table. And again, if you want to end the conflict, you're probably going to want to do that, unless you just want Putin to overrun Ukraine. If you want that to happen, then stop support, and that's what's going to happen. But I think the narrative, I think, is a little bit off. Because you're right. If the war continues, right, I'm not sure the Democrats have as much, to play off of. But I think if the war is ended, then I think what they'll say is, he gave it away, acting as if somehow Ukraine could have won and gained all their territory back, which is unrealistic.
I think it's more compelling to say we stopped all the wars. And I think for Americans right now, I think they want to, look, we saved your money, we stopped sending billions there, we stopped the war, people aren't dying anymore. I think that's a much more compelling narrative than, I don't think Americans care as much, this is a guess, about giving away a little piece of a land they know nothing about.
Yeah, okay, you're right. That was my mistake. I think you're right in the sense that if the war is still ongoing, the Democrats have a better chance.
You lied. You said you'd shut it down in day one.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. And from an electoral perspective, down the road, 4 years from now, 2028.
So if I'm Putin, I'm going, I know Trump, he's incentivized to stop this thing. And, so that puts me in a stronger position, because if Trump doesn't stop it, then maybe Eric Trump's not going to get in next year, or whoever, or J.D. Vance is.
Yeah. I mean, I think Putin also, is smart enough to remember that it was the Trump administration that authorized lethal aid to Ukraine to begin with. Back during Obama-Biden years, they did not authorize lethal aid into Ukraine. And despite apparently Crimea annexation was going to be a red line, and it wasn't.
There's no safe like a Simply Safe, the sponsor of today's episode and who this next story is brought to you by. There's something I never told you guys that happened a couple of years ago right here in the Diary of a CEO studio. You might remember that when I said we'd lost the audio files for Mel C's episode, who is a former Spice Girl, I didn't say how or why we'd lost the audio files. Well, the reason we lost the audio file was because someone broke into our studio at night time and stole all of our cameras and a few of our key hard drives, which contained those audio files. It was a shocking day, and it led us on a quest to figure out how to secure our building. And that's when I discovered Simply Safe, who are now a sponsor of this podcast. Interestingly, we did have security at the time, but the type that we had only triggered an alarm once intruders were inside the building. What I like about Simply Safe is their Active Guard outdoor protection, which notifies you and their live monitoring agents when suspicious activity is detected outside of your building, especially if it's an unfamiliar face. And most security providers don't have the type of AI technology. It also means that guards can trigger alarm systems or turn on spotlights which deter intruders from entering your property in the first place. If we'd had Simply Safe installed at the time, it likely means that we would have known earlier that intruders were trying to get into our building at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we could have acted to secure the building straight away. So this is your reminder to make sure your home and workplace is secure. Simply Safe is offering my listeners in the United States an exclusive discount of 60% off your new Simply Safe security system when you sign up for a select professional monitoring plan. You'll also get your first month free. Just visit simplysafe.com/diary to customize your plan right now. And remember, there's no safe like a Simply Safe. We mentioned disinformation, TikTok. I mean, TikTok has ties to China, it has origins to China.
Right.
Do you think TikTok is... The interesting thing about TikTok, so I worked in social media for 10 years, is TikTok as a platform, the algorithm is so unbelievably addictive. How would I describe it? I guess the word is the algorithm is so powerful. And you notice this, anyone that uses TikTok, you'll notice this because if you post something on your page and you have 1 million followers, the post could either get 1,000 views or 10 million views. And when I think about algorithms, the variance in views you're getting basically are an expression of how powerful the algorithm is. So on Instagram, say you have 1 million followers and you post something, the variance between how many views you're going to get is quite low. But on TikTok, it's wide. So what the algorithm is doing is it's saying, take that and show everyone. Take this, show no one. And what this means is that so this is why it's so addictive to young people, because everything they're seeing is really, really interesting stuff. Yeah. And they care a lot less about how many followers you have. And it's more about, is this really, really interesting? So as a platform, it's super addictive. It can put you in an echo chamber faster than anything. Because if I'm looking at videos about, I don't know, X, it's going to keep showing me the most interesting, emotional, fear-centric videos about that thing. No boring.
Yeah.
You're going to see no boring. So do you think there's a chance that TikTok is being used by one of our foreign adversaries to divide us?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think social media is, look, in the old days, if you wanted to influence hearts and minds, if you wanted to change, say you were interested in turning the population in where, Kenya, Nigeria, Niger, then it was kind of old school stuff, right? You would, how am I going to get information out there? I'm gonna recruit a bunch of journalists, right, and local journalists, and I'm gonna get them to publish stories, right? Maybe there's a radio station. I'll recruit somebody who can put stories on the radio. Technology has given the ability to do covert action campaigns, propaganda, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, a real jumpstart, right? So the concept is the same. I'm trying to influence opinion. I'm trying to, get viewers, whatever it is, trying to change hearts and minds, but you can do it much faster, right? And
that's the type of thing the US would have done to their adversaries, right?
Sure.
The US would literally send a entrepreneur undercover into these countries to start a perfectly legitimate business with his family. They'd find a way to potentially fund it in some way to make sure it was successful. And he might be starting a social media app in Russia, undercover. Like that's the type of thing the CIA and other, maybe MI6 or other forces would do.
It's you're looking for ways to. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily want to say, okay, I'm going to go into China, I'm going to go into Russia and start a business, right? Because now that's problematic from an operational perspective, right? But you're going to use the technology for sure to get to as many eyeballs as possible. And so, yes, I mean, TikTok's a great example of that. There's a reason why Chinese citizens can't access TikTok inside China, right? I mean, if you think about that, is TikTok, is it beneficial to our kids? Well, if it was, TikTok could probably be available inside China, but it's not. It's a tough one. We deal with that on a personal level all the time, trying to figure out how much screen time, and what the kids can access. Now they're getting older, so it's you're kind of fighting a losing battle on that one.
Some people think that there's like a back channel where China are harvesting data from the back end of TikTok in some way. And I much like you, I'm less likely to believe those kinds of conspiracy theories. But one theory that makes logical sense to me is if I was China and I wanted to sow division in the United States, what I would do is make an app, a social media app that has a really, really powerful divisive algorithm, which really, really is strong. And I would just make it succeed in the country.
Yeah.
I don't need the data because, as you said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tear people apart.
I would say, yes, that's a good point. And you see that based on what you're saying. I don't have anywhere near the level of understanding of the app world, but you see that when you just say, okay, oh, I'm interested in that. Look at that. There's a protest over here, right? Next thing you know, you're getting 40 protest videos or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I would say also they still want data, right? They thrive on collecting mass amounts of information. And so, I don't know that tech world well enough to get into a conversation about that, but it is clear based on their economic espionage and efforts over the past that they love nothing better than to collect as much information as possible. And it doesn't even have to be on a target that you think, no wonder they're targeting Raytheon or they're targeting a company that makes sense. They'll go after anybody, really. And it is, yeah. So, but I think for the most part, when you talk about social media, what I worry about the most is this tendency for people not to question, not to be cynical, or not to be at least curious and say, where's this come from? Right? If everyone would just do that, because there is no other defense at the end of the day. You don't want the government telling you what you can see and what you can't see, I don't think anyway. But there's no other defense in the front line, which is the individual with their smartphone looking at something and saying, and then stopping for at least a moment to say, where's this information coming from? Is it credible? Let me check elsewhere before I send this on to my family, right? And create, more conflict. Just take the time to be quizzical.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.